still makes me laugh every single time. I love it. It is super funny. The eagle is ridiculous. Good day, everyone. Welcome to Generally Irritable. I am super pleased this fine day to have Mr. Bob Bancroft with me to talk about the economy, economics in Vermont, things that really affect the economy, and some of the really big major obstacles that Vermont is dealing with in relation to housing and cost of living and things like that. So hello, Mr. Bancroft. Say hello to everybody. Tell them a little bit about yourself, what you do, and why you're an expert on this conversation.
Hi, Erica. Well, I'm Bob Bancroft. I live in Westford. I have a PhD in agricultural economics, but most of the work that I have done for the last 30 years has been non-agriculture in nature. Although in the 80s, I was a professor at the University of Vermont, Department of Ag Resource Economics, where I taught economic theory and actually small business finance, and I did teach management.
Cool.
I have a dairy farm background. I was very younger. I even had a farm when I was first adult. And then in addition to so I've had an economic consulting business. Actually, since I returned to Vermont in 1981 to the university, within 2 months, I got my first consulting gig. And so anyways, I've been quite fortunate. I was able to resign from UVM in 1991 and concentrate just on my consulting. And my commute has been great. It's down the stairs to the kitchen. And if it's a crappy day, I go into the office and work. If it's not, I go outside.
Excellent.
Plenty of things to do outside.
So just so you know, Bob, make sure you, when you're talking, you have a tendency to talk down a little bit. So just make sure that we got a good volume so everybody can hear you super well.
Okay. I'm always criticized because I'm hard of hearing by talking too loud.
No, you can't talk loud enough for us.
Okay.
I mean, don't scream, but
anyway, so I was an economic, and I still am. I still do some. I'm more than semi-retired. I'm quarterly retired. But then for 6 years, from 2015 to 2020, I was a representative from the Chittenden 8-3 district, which covers the town of Westford and the northern half or the rural part of Essex.
And that was that was until last year. So this was your first. So someone else is now in the seat as of 2021. You held it through 2020.
That's correct.
Yeah. So you've actually gotten probably to have a good view of the bills and legislation that have been passed in Vermont that have not been great for our economy.
Well, I don't know if I got a great view on them. I know some of them.
But you got to view some.
But I tend to generalize them. I can't give you bill numbers or even specific bills properly.
There's so many.
Talk about what the general impact has been over the last, nearly 20 years but even longer, going back into the 90s, the mismanagement of the state economy and state finances, ranging from state employees and teachers' retirement, which is just tragic. Anybody that was around in the 90s and the first part of this century who was that elected to office ought to be run out on a rail. But
say more about that.
We've continued on with other policies. we've been quite fortunate in that we are subsidized by the federal government heavily. So really, Vermont is a poor state in the grand scheme of things. And we tend to pass, not tend, we pass a lot of laws and bills that really don't look at the cost, the economic costs of these bills, what it does to business, what it does to, and ultimately what it does for tax revenue. Um, um, which many of these bills have a negative impact on tax revenues. And so therefore the response is, well, then we just need to raise the tax rates.
So when you say, you said the folks who have been involved with the teachers or the state employee, the public pension, basically, you said they ought to be run out on a rail. Anybody that's been involved in that in the last couple of decades. Why specifically, or can you give us more information about why you say that, what that means?
Sure. In the early 90s, we had a little bit of recession, and it was during, I think Howard Dean was the governor. It was decided that instead of putting in the requisite amount of money that the actual actuaries state each year that's needed for the state to put in for our retirement programs, we I think at the time, and I don't know this for absolutely sure, at the time was that, well, let's temporarily, we need the funds somewhere else and we'll make up for it. Well,
Famous
never
last
did.
words.
Yeah. And it went on for years and years and years, all through the 90s and up through, I believe it was in 2007, people finally realized, or some people finally realized, that we cannot continue on this path. Because by 2007, again, I hope I've got my numbers straight. In 2007, the unfunded liabilities, and let me explain what unfunded liabilities are. So actuaries say they look at the number of people that are in the that are working for you by state employees and a number of teachers, what their age is. They make some assumptions on when they're going to retire. They look at actual life tables to see how long they'll live. And so they make an estimate of what the demands are going to be on those pension trust funds. And then based on that, they tell the state how much is needed this year. You should set aside this year into the state teachers' retirement and into the state employees' retirement, and then also into the teachers and the state employees' health benefits. So it's basically 4 trust funds. By 2007, it was up to 2.7 million unfunded liabilities. Underscore unfunded. This is money that should have been put in, and it had grown. And so they realized that this couldn't continue on anymore. So they decided, there was a big to-do about it. What they were going to do is basically take out a 30-year mortgage. And they were going to pay it back over 30 years. So by the year 2038, they should be totally caught up, and they would make up for this unfunded liability over and above what they're supposed to put in every single year. And so for a number of years, we have put in extra money. I think last year it was well over $100,000 we put in. And I think that's been consistent for at least 2 or 3 years. I don't remember exactly the amount of extra over and above our normal contribution. By the July 30th of 2019, that unfunded liability of those 4 trust funds, the state employees, both their pension and their health care, and teachers' retirement, both their pension and their health care, had grown to 4.6 billion.
Billion? With a B.
I'm sorry.
With a B.
Yeah, from 2.7 billion. I don't know if I said million. It was 2.7 billion in 2007. And then 12 years later, it now had grown by almost another additional $2 billion. That's in spite of these catch-up payments of well over $100 million each year, in addition to what we normally put in. And then, even more disturbing, although I think maybe it won't be as bad as it sounds, July 30th of 2020, that's when
So
they
in
give a
the
report on it.
pandemic, yeah.
The unfunded liabilities had grown to 5.7 billion.
Oh my God.
It had grown by over $1 billion in 1 year's
In a
time.
year.
Now, in 1 year. Now that may be an overstatement because based on what the stock market back in June was in, had really been in bad shape. It had gone down
Yeah,
quite
it
a
tanked
bit.
with the COVID. Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see where we are this coming June. But although my crystal ball says I'll bet we're still over $5 billion. But
So how does
even if we're back to the 4.7, we're never going to get it retired by 2038, not unless we're willing to put in well over $200 million of additional funds. The
so
reason
how
why
does
the
hold
reason
on,
why
Bob.
this is so upsetting is that this is money that could be used in a couple of areas that the state desperately needs funds. And those two areas that in my mind, are housing, workforce housing, and childcare. But that's
So
funds that have got to go to mismanagement in the past.
so how does it happen that we are so underfunded in those trust funds? Like, what had to have happened? What decisions were made for that trust fund to be so underfunded?
We're going to spend it on other things. We want this, we want this program, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want to do this, and so we're going to do it. And the financial responsibility is just out the door.
So was it like so I'm imagining like I'm the legislature, say, and I get a bill in the mail for my teachers' pensions, and it says, oh, it's $1 billion this year, or it's $100 million this year you're supposed to add. And the state legislature just said, man, instead of that, let's spend $100 million on solar panel subsidies or whatever else. So it was like they had a bill for it and they just said, we're not going to pay it.
Yeah,
Is
it's in the budget, and obviously people on the Appropriations Committee in both the House and the Senate, are aware of this, how much was needed, and they got a report. But nobody was really squawking. I mean, I've been squawking about this for over 6 years, but obviously it did not resonate with anybody. Although this year, all of a sudden, lo and behold, we're getting religion. Beth Pierces, the treasurer, came out with a report and said, "Look, folks, we can't keep going any further. We've got to do something here, we've got to start retiring. Bringing that unfunded liability down." And so, she's got proposed that won't be any impact on current retirees, but new workers and existing workers were going to have to pay a lot more. And I can't remember how many years ago, it was maybe 10 years ago, time flies, that they did require that state employees, I'm not sure about teachers, contribute more to their retirement. But now they're going to have to contribute more because obviously we just can't continue to go down this road. Now,
well, and
this year they'll probably put in a little bit more because despite COVID, we actually got a windfall because of the federal government. We got $250 million of extra money, and so I think some of that will ultimately end up going into the pension funds and the health the trust funds, and I know that there's some going to propose to go into broadband and some other areas, but some of it will be squandered. Mark my word. I mean, every single cent of it. Not every, a lot. The big lion's share of that should go into reducing this unfunded liability, and then there are other issues that we need to address. Unfortunately, there's just not enough dollars unless people are willing to say, look, We can't afford all some of these programs. They're nice. If we were a rich state, I was going to say if we were sitting on oil, but I don't think today that'd make much difference. But if we were a relatively well-to-do state, well, then we could afford all these programs we have. I'm not saying that they're bad. The fact is, we've been living beyond our means, significantly living beyond our means, and now the chickens are coming home to roost.
Well,
we don't have the funds to address some of the pressing problems that we have.
So one of the things that I found interesting when that story came out about Beth Pierce a couple weeks ago about the pensions is I was seeing people post about it on social media. Oh, like who has been, oh my God, this is terrible. Who let this ball drop? And I was like, I literally responded. I said, Republican Senate candidates ran on this, but no one paid attention. I personally reached out to the labor unions and the teachers union and everything to address this specific issue. I got no return phone calls, no return emails. I was completely ignored, and they gave tens of thousands of dollars to the Democrat candidates.
Yeah, I know.
And I said, so I said that I was like, Republicans ran on this and we were completely ignored, and all the unions gave their money to the Democrat candidates who have allowed this to continue. And I had somebody push back and say that it was Republicans' fault. And I was like, how can it possibly be the Republicans' fault when the legislature has been run by Democrats and progressives for decades?
Yeah.
So why is it?
There's
why
no
is it when
excuse. I mean, this rests squarely with the Democrats. This issue rests with them. They have been spending beyond their means, and they are continuing on with that in this current session. They want new programs, they want new allocations for this and that, and the central things, the things that they really should be concentrating on, are being short shrift.
Well, and that's like I saw they're already trying to get more money for the Climate Council. So the 23-member Climate Council that's going to, make everything outlawed and tell everybody what to do. They're already overspending on what they were allocated.
Yeah.
And they want more money.
Right.
Just to sit around and pontificate.
Yeah. Yeah, they want more money for that, and they want more money for here and there, and the fact of the matter is that not more money, they should be cutting programs. I'm not saying we're cutting these programs because they're bad.
Right.
But we've got to set priorities. Right. And the question is, but politicians hardly ever answer that question. And if they answer it, they never follow through on it.
No.
What are your policies? Everybody talks about, well, boy, I want this and I want this. I want a policy for this. We need to address this problem. We need funds for that. Good. That's great. We have a discussion about whether that's really important. But nobody wants to say, where's that funds coming from? Are you willing to give up something? It's no. We'll expand the sales tax to the items that are no longer being taxed, and then we're going to add it on to the services, and we'll lower the rate to 3.6%. We'll generate a little extra money.
And that's a legitimate.
You want to take a bet of what that rate will be 5 years, 10 years from now? It won't be 3.6. I can tell you that.
Yep. Well, and the thing that bugs me the most about some of these conversations is if you try to be the reasonable person talking about living within your means, it means you're hateful, bigoted, you hate poor people, you're a big meanie. We aren't allowed to have sincere conversations. It's like if you say living off of a credit card is not okay, it means you're a hateful person. And I can't figure out where that kind of thinking came from.
Yeah, well, so many of these people in Montpelier that I ran into up there, they're intellectually challenged. They're analytically challenged. That's the approach.
Yeah.
It sounds, they're sort of intuitive thinkers. If it sounds good, it must be good. And so therefore, end of discussion. We don't have to look at it. Nobody wants, they can't or refrain from doing a cost benefit analysis. What is the cost of this program, and what is the benefits of it? And the costs are where are we going to get these funds from? Are we going to be shortchanging our pensions? Are we going to be shortchanging our young families? Are we shortchanging our workforce? You know, the analytical issue is, how do we grow this economy so that we can generate the revenue that would allow us to afford these programs?
You mean be responsible like a grown-up?
Lay the foundation and build a house. They want to put the roof on right now. And what it does, it just gets worse. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. Although again, I thought maybe people would get religion back in 2009, but the federal government came in and bailed us out, and we did quite well during that period. And now it looks like with COVID, we are not only being bailed out, but we're actually getting extra funds. It isn't until we finally hit that breaking point that says, we can't, in order for us to afford these programs, we've got one of two choices. We can either expand the economy and bring in new taxpayers and grow the economy and generate revenue that way, or we can try to tax our way out. Yeah. And I argue that if you want to exacerbate the problem, raise the taxes, put a surcharge on wealthy people. Wealthy people don't have to live in Vermont. There's a lot of other areas in this country that are aesthetically pleasing, that have very advantageous tax programs, or lack thereof of income taxes. And legislators have been real careful about killing that goose that lays the golden eggs, and that's the wealthy people in the state. We are fortunate; we have a lot of well-to-do people in this state, and they fund a significant portion of our revenues. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but it's a very, very high percent, the top 5%. And so when you go mucking around and you start raising rates on those people, you put a 3% surcharge on them, there are going to be some people that are right on the cusp. There's always somebody on the margin. And that's the final straw. I'm out of here. I believe Maryland learned its lesson. They did something very similar. They raised the taxes on wealthy people. And guess what happened? They ended up generating less tax revenue.
Wow. That is amazing. And that's what I think one of the things that is so shocking to me. I think you said I'm not going to say it the way you did. I can't remember, something about like lacking analytical skills, basically, where it sounds good and it sounds like it will be helpful, but ultimately it does the reverse. It causes people to leave. It raises the cost of living, which makes it even harder for regular people to live here. And they just choose to leave, or they choose not to have children, or they don't build a house, or things like that. And this idea that the government is responsible for fixing all of our woes rather than the community coming together to work on these things, that's another thing that I don't really understand and have tried to figure out where that comes from. Why is it you think that people believe that it's the government's responsibility to take care of everything?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that
I know that's a speculation.
There is a role for government. There are issues where the government should come in, but in the process, what we're discouraging innovation, work ethic, sense of I'm responsible for my own life. It's really tragic what's happening to our younger generation, that the expectation is that they'll be taken care of no matter what their decisions are.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, the student loan thing, interesting area. I mean, the government caused that problem. The federal government caused that problem. It had unlimited funds that they were willing to lend to students and parents,
Yep.
and you and the universities and the colleges just kept raising their prices, and parents and students kept borrowing the money, and then they would proceed to get, without any thoughts of, how am I going to pay this back? You know, I would like to be a philosopher. That's what I really would like to do in life. But if I'm a philosopher and I got $150,000 worth of debt, I
Where
better
is
be
that?
willing to live in a very cheap apartment and run around in older vehicles for a long time in my life, because I'm just not going to generate significant kind of living income to support a middle class lifestyle, and
I,
people don't think that through, and so now,
no,
what's the government's got to come in and bail me out? Got to bail me out,
I
and they're the
literally
ones that
was
caused the problem. So there's the argument. There's an argument for the government to bail them out because they're the ones that caused the problem to begin with. But
I
the
did
point is, they
say
don't learn anything from it.
on that one, especially with the student loan conversation, I literally have been saying the federal government is essentially has been a predatory lender. They have allowed people to take out loans for and tons of money, that hundreds of thousands of dollars for degrees that they will never be able to earn the kind of money that they need to pay those things back. And because education is now subsidized by the federal government, universities have no reason to be competitive, to innovate, to cut costs or whatever, because there is literally just an endless supply of federal tax dollars for people to get degrees for stuff that are in some cases absolutely meaningless. It'd be
Yeah.
like, I'm going to go to the bank and I'm going to get a mortgage on a house that is a dump, right? Like, say bad people have been living there. It was a house fire. It's been burned down. And I'm going to go to the bank and I'm going to be like, you know what, bank? I want you to give me $400,000 to buy this piece of property that is nowhere near what it's actually valued at. And then thank you very much. Like, a bank wouldn't do that. So why are they loaning money for degrees that won't earn income? How is that not predatory lending?
Yeah. It's very sad. I mean, again, that's just goes that whole process of being analytical, making, saying, okay, this, I'm going to make a certain decision, but I'm going to look at the ramifications of it. I'm going to
Yeah.
look at the cost. I'm going to look at the benefits, and people just don't do that. And we've raised a generation that says, I don't need to do that. I'm just going to,
Yeah.
whatever I want to do. I'm
Yeah.
entitled to this. I'm entitled to that.
No personal
And
responsibility.
government will take care of me. And
Yeah.
and
There are no
that's
consequences for my
yeah, yeah,
actions. Someone's going to take care of me no matter what bad decision I make. It's someone else's responsibility to bail me out of that bad decision.
yeah. And of course,
Oh my
then
gosh.
you got the peer pressure going to college. I mean, I had it when I was back in the '60s. But there's peer pressure. You got to go to college. To go into the trades. Well, that's where the less intellectually
Mhm.
challenged.
Yeah. We
Uh,
denigrate people who
yeah,
work with their hands.
and so there's that stigma with it. But boy, I got to tell you, if I had young children right now, let's say they were teenagers in high school, I sure would be talking with them about going into the trades.
Yep.
Um, quite frankly, if I was to give, let's say I'm willing to spend $100,000 on my children's education over time, I would contribute and help pay back loans. That would be $100,000 I could give to that child to buy a
Mm.
home.
And start a
And
business.
yeah, and then they could, in today's environment, they can get training to become a master electrician or a master plumber and make six-figure incomes
Yep.
in a relatively short amount of time.
Yep.
These people are going to be much better off financially than some of their counterparts that go off to the university, borrow tens and tens of thousands of dollars. That's 4 years that they're out of the workforce if they're unless they go on. It may be longer if they decide to go on and get advanced degrees. But 4 years they're out of the workforce, they're not earning very much, and they're coming out with sizable debt. And many of them are making very poor decisions about what they're majoring in. Again, if you got the money and you're willing to sacrifice your lifestyle because you have an area of your interest, good. All the more power to you. But don't expect that because you made that decision that I somehow am responsible for making sure that you have a higher standard of living than you can afford on your
Oh my God, that is such. Oh, write that down. That is such a good point. Oh, okay. I'm gonna move on. I want to like talk more about that, but I won't belabor the topic. Okay, so you started to mention a little earlier, and we talked about this a little bit, is housing. And so, you had made a comment about that, one of the issues that we're dealing with in Vermont is the cost of living, housing, and you made a comment about like we could be spending that money if we had been responsible and kept up with our pensions. The extra money we're having to put in now, we could have used towards housing. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, sure. But let me back up. Vermont, the only way it's going to thrive is if it grows its economy. Unless, let me digress for a second. Where we're headed now is we're headed into a modern day feudal system where we have not necessarily landed gentry, but we have elitist gentry. And then we're going to have all the other people, which we're going to try to move into urban areas, and they were, the lower ranks of the class. It's going to be a class system, and they're going to be a lower class as opposed, and the elitists are going to be in the upper class. If we don't want that scenario, and I don't want to, and we're headed down that path, is that we need to grow our economy. Now, in order to grow our economy and expand, we need to expand our workforce. And you can't expand our workforce unless you have workforce housing, affordable workforce housing, and also in order to ultimately to expand the economy, as you need to have affordable childcare. These are really important foundations for the growth in our economy. Um, until that happens, we're going to be. I was going to say tread water, but I don't think it's even tread water. We're going to continue our downhill slide, and the only thing that's going to slow that slide is how the largesse of the federal government. How much is the federal government willing to put into the state? I know in the $1.9 trillion package that Biden is trying to pass through, in that is several billion dollars, hundreds, I believe, hundreds of billions of dollars to state governments to basically help them out with things like pensions, because Vermont's not the only state that has problems with its pensions. People have been overspending in many states. And I might add, most of those are blue states.
Yeah.
So until we, it's difficult now because we don't have the funds to vote to workforce housing. We nibble around the edges. We talk about this little program, but that's not getting us, to where we need to go. And we talk about the need for affordable child care. That's a $200+ million lift for the state government if we're going to try to make child care reasonable so that we can attract young people into the state which has all kinds of benefits, not only economically, but socially, culturally, will have benefits for this state. But until we address that, this state is going to be basically stagnant.
So,
The
so
only bright ray is this. Well, we were seeing some of it before, where people are able to work at home, and so there has been some shift of people into Vermont that are able to work at home and with employers outside the state. So that is a benefit, but I don't see that as a solution to the economic growth that this state so desperately needs.
So I want to back up a little bit. This idea, my hackles always go up when people say, we need the federal government in order to do X, Y, or Z. Because what that means is we're saying that the rest of the country is responsible for paying for our way of living or our what we need. So just like you were saying, how people want their personal decision making to be taken care of by the state or whatever, in terms of the social student loans and stuff like that. Why should Vermont have an expectation that the rest of the country pay for housing in Vermont, when the main reason we don't have enough housing in Vermont is our own legislation that makes it not a good investment to build here?
Yeah. Well, as I said earlier, there is a role for federal government to help out, and there are certain areas. Some states are more blessed than others, and so there is a role for federal government to come in and help those people particularly at the lower end of the economic scale, through nutritional programs and through things like credits, child credits, and then for low income credits. So there is a role for government to come in, but Vermont has become addicted to federal money. I think we're second to New York in the amount of money on a per capita basis that we receive from Washington, D.C. I believe we were number one in COVID funds on a per capita basis. So we've become addicted to this income. If the federal government was to pull back, although there certainly doesn't appear to be any appetite for that now, this state would be in serious trouble. And I think, if nothing else, from an insurance kind of perspective, that they really ought to try to get our economy going, because there is that possibility that the federal government will cut back on its largesse to Vermont.
Right.
And
right now
it's
they're
easy
just
for me to
printing
write
money.
scenarios where that might happen. I mean, look at what's happening to our national debt now.
Yeah.
We're about to
that's what they're
embrace
just
really
printing
high
money.
inflation.
Exactly. It's not really money that we're getting sent. They're printing dollars and then sending it.
They're printing and borrowing money, and we're going to have inflation. And this is really going to hurt low-income people. It's going to hurt people on fixed incomes, and it's even going to hurt people that are on that have a pensions program and they have a COLA. But many of these COLAs are capped. That they will only go so high, or 50% of the cost of living, or they'll go up to 2% or 2.5%. And after that, that's what they'll max out at. This is really going to hurt many people, but nobody's. Again, it's living in the moment. Living in the moment. Oh, we need to get some funds out there. There are people hurting because of COVID. We need to target those funds to people that are really hurting. And then in the process, there's a secondary benefit of helping the economy to grow. But people are doing relatively well. In general, I mean, you look at the business. I saw on the news this week, snowmobile sales have gone through the ceiling. And I mean, I understand
Really?
why they are. Yes, because people are, they want to go outside. It's a form of socialization where they can be outside. But let me tell you, snowmobiling and I was an ex-snowmobiler, is a very, very expensive proposition. Snow machines are well over $10,000.
Oh, wow.
Cost you $400 to to get your machine registered, trail passes, insurance, and what have you. 500 right there. So a lot of people are doing quite well, and I understand it's the same way with boats and many other things. There are a segment of the population that's really suffering, and the poor person who relied on the service sector, particularly the hospitality industry. I mean, they have been devastated.
Yep.
And they're the ones that really, truly need the help. And there are other people along the spectrum here that have run into hard times because of COVID. And so let's target those funds for that. I am absolutely opposed to passing off billions and billions and billions of dollars to these states who have financially mismanaged the government. Quite frankly, that's Vermont. Vermont's one of those.
Well, and that's why I say, people I hear all of the time demeaning landlords as being greedy, and the reason why it's so expensive is landlords are terrible. And they miss the whole process that leads up to having a house built. It's like people are not aware of the cost of Act 250 permitting and licensing to build a piece of property. They don't understand that we have a shortage of housing in Vermont. And part of the reason is because it is not it if I'm an investor, if I'm a business developer, if I'm a housing developer, and I know that I'm not going to make a large enough return on investment to make it worth it, basically to be able to have enough money left over to create my next housing development, I'm not going to build houses in an area where I can't make money or where I'm going to lose money. And Vermont has a legislative environment, whether it's, because of the state or like in Burlington where they have even stricter rules than the state does. People don't understand why nobody wants to build in Vermont and how that creates a shortage of housing.
You're right. I mean, Act 250, Act 250 has done great things for the state of Vermont. I was around when Governor Davis enacted got Act 250 passed, and was very good friends with the man the lawyer that wrote most of the Act 250, Jonathan Brownell. But one of the consequences has been that it has restricted the housings. It added quite an additional cost on the housing. Some of my economic consulting has been in Act 250 cases, and it adds tens of thousands of dollars, several tens of thousands, to the cost of a home to go through Act 250. Not only you got to pay for engineers, you got to pay for economists like me to prove that it's a reasonable rate of return. You got to lawyers, and you go through that process, and then you can't do that. You got to do this, and then there's additional requirements. You have to have this. You have to have so much open land set aside, and what have you. Those costs get very, very expensive, and you immediately price these houses away out of the range of working class individuals. They can't afford them.
And that's the folks that you said, like the labor force, basically.
Yeah,
we need labor force housing, and we've essentially just like priced them out of Vermont.
Well, anybody that's tried to, I don't know. I'm a jack of all trades, and I do my own plumbing and electrical work. But I think when I hear from other people, if you've got a plumbing issue, good luck in getting somebody to come out and help you, because for a number of reasons. One, we talked about the education aspect of it, and secondly, there's no housing for those people to get started out. I mean, eventually a plumber will do quite well, but for the first few years, it's especially if they got a family, they aren't going to have that six-figure income.
No. Yeah. And that's a lot of houses are, like 300,000 plus, even if you're outside of Burlington.
Yeah, I can tell you horror stories on it just didn't make any sense where and Act 250 cases that just didn't make any sense at all. Just drove up the price so that constrain the supply of working class housing. And we don't have enough. And I can't imagine. There's no way in hell you could ever talk me into investing into apartments. First off, the rate of return that I would want, given the risk, would be so high that I would be accused of being a robber baron. And secondly, it's not only just the rate of renting the place out, but you have the issues of people not paying rent and evictions and that kind of stuff. And so it gets quite complicated. I'm not sure why people would want to get into that.
Oh, trust me, Bob. I was mentioning that I moved back to Vermont in 2018 to buy my grandparents' triplex in Burlington. And if I knew then what I know now, I probably would not have done it. Because it especially now they're trying to get rid of no-cause evictions and taxes have gone up again. And it's already, I figured it out. Now I'm not going to remember correctly, but I figured out the math for the 2 units that we have. And it was the 1 bedroom, the taxes. So if I take the whole unit, right, if I take the whole house by square footage and divide the taxes by the number of square footage, the 1 bedroom is about $140 a month in property taxes. And the 2 bedroom is like $240 in property taxes a month, where it just like, okay, so you don't want me to be able to really pick who lives there. So you're trying to limit my ability to get good tenants in the first place, people who will take care of it and value it and treat it with respect so that it doesn't cost me tens of thousands of dollars to renovate it every time. So you're trying to make it so I can't, then you're taxing the heck out of me. And that money doesn't even cover all the compliance issues and the things that we have to pay for on a yearly basis just to even be allowed to be landlords. And then it just like, it boggles the mind. It really, really does. It's like, you guys don't know math. You clearly have never owned a business. You've never been a landlord. Have you ever even been a property owner? Are you rich and just don't have an understanding of what it's like to be a working class person and have to put food on the table? Like, why don't they see that these kinds of policies, again, like you said, Act 250 has some good stuff about it. But why is it that people just kind of refuse to see that at a certain point, instead of it just protecting our environment, it becomes a stranglehold on our economy?
Analytically challenged. I mean, are they still, is Burlington still talking about rent control?
Oh yeah. I mean, they're not calling it rent control, but they're basically trying to eliminate Airbnbs. And that if you want to have a short-term rental property, they're going to charge you like $10,000 impact fee a year. It's like $8,000 impact fee per room.
If you want to redline a neighborhood or a state or a town, put in rent control. You're going to end up with the worst slums that you could imagine, because owners are not going to put any money into them, and they're just, over time, they're going to get run down. I mean, there's people need to sit down and analyze the issue. They got to look at the economics. I mean, what will the impact be? Right now, it's going to be wonderful. Oh, good, that's great. We can all feel good. But 10 years down the road, are we going to feel good? No.
Yeah. Well, and that's what, even like little stuff. Like I have we have great roommates and tenants in our unit, and great people, really kind, thoughtful, no complaints. And then this week, I got a call. Hey, did anybody let you know that there's a leak under the sink in the kitchen? And I was like, no. And I've told all my tenants, you tell me immediately. You tell us immediately if anything is broken or goes wrong, because if it's not fixed right away, it can make it worse. We want to fix it. We want to keep our place nice. I find out 3 or 4 days later that the garbage disposal has been leaking. And it's like, okay, first of all, that's an electrical hazard because it's leaking through the unit, which means it's a fire hazard. And you guys didn't tell me. Not to mention, you're going to ruin the cabinet that the sink is in, and I'm going to have to replace that. And then what does that do to the floor? Like, you got,
Yeah.
like, this is not cheap. This is not easy. This costs
it's not
money,
cheap.
and you guys don't care. Even good, thoughtful, reasonable people don't pay enough attention to stuff that breaks, and then it makes it worse. And then it's like, oh, I'm digressing. I feel like
and they raise property taxes, and I guess the assumption is that the landlord will eat it. The landlord, he or she is not going to eat it. They're going to pass it on. So I mean, but so many people. I'll bet you if you went out and you did a sample of 100 renters and asked them about whether they thought raising property taxes were a good idea, that they could fund more programs in the state and in the city, and they can listen. I don't know what they might be. But anyways, there's a whole list of them. I'll bet you most of them would say it'd be a wonderful idea. But then when you went back and said to them, okay, well, you understand that this will be passed on to you and your rents will go up by the concomitant or similar amount. So I think you're going to get some different answers for some of those people.
Well, and I even had somebody on the show earlier this week. We were having a conversation about rents in the city and stuff like that, and one person said, somebody wrote in the comments, well, my understanding is that landlords can just kick a 90-year-old out onto the street with a week's notice, and I think that's wrong. And I said, who told you that?
Yeah.
Because that's a lie. First of all, that's a lie. It takes 3 to 6 months minimum for an eviction, minimum. And that's with cause. I said, who told you that? And he said, the renters union. And I was like, so basically these organizations that say they're out there, working for the people are literally just spreading lies and making people afraid and hysterical over things that are just not true. And then that causes them to then be on the side against the people who are really mostly trying to provide a service for their neighbors.
Yeah, it's tragic because we see it local governments, state government, and nationally, in the press, you name it. People are woefully uninformed and don't care to be. They take the sound bites and they swallow it hook, line, and sinker. And there are groups out there that push these things because it's a benefit to them for whatever reason, whether it's financial or political gains, or let's divert the attention from the major problem and let's deal with this one. Or we can exaggerate the severity of the problem if we say this, but ultimately it turns out to be a lie. But the lie, I mean, I can think of a couple instances right now that people, if you went out and you asked them questions about these two particular items, they would be going on what they heard several months or weeks ago.
Yeah. Oh, it makes me crazy. Okay. And so I think it's another one of those things where I go, okay, we all agree we want Vermont to be more affordable. We all agree that we need to make it easier for people to live here. And rather than taxing people to death, why can't we have an honest conversation about what is actually creating housing shortages, for housing to be too expensive? Like, why do we have to look for a boogeyman to blame rather than looking at, I mean, is it just too hard? Is it just, oh, it makes me crazy.
Oh, I think most, if you went up to Montpelier and you did a survey of all the representatives and senators, they'd all say, yeah, we got a real problem here with workforce housing. The next question is, what are you going to do about it? Oh, we're going to do this and we're doing that. But ultimately, um, when you sit down and say, okay, all right, you're going to do this and this sounds good, but let's add this up and say, what's the net effect of this? How many houses are we going to get?
Mm,
And when you do that, it's woefully inadequate. I mean, so
yeah.
they can say that they're addressing the problem. Well, look at me, but it's woefully. They're while they're addressing the problem peripherally. They're not getting at the
Mm,
root, and we're not making any significant process. Because remember, the basics got to be, if
yeah.
people would just stop and say, look, in order for us to afford the programs that we currently have, forget about adding new ones. We need to grow the economy. If we
Mm,
don't, then we're going to be forced to make cuts unless the
yep.
federal government keeps coming in and bailing us out. And then
Yep.
someday, I think that will happen, and people are going to, oh my God,
Whoops.
and now we're going to have to cut these programs, and there's going to be health.
Yep. Oh, okay. So another topic that, because I just realized this went really fast. I didn't realize we've been talking for almost an hour already. It's very fascinating. So one of the things you talk about a lot that I've heard you mention in previous conversations and when we were talking about what topics to cover for this conversation, you've brought up childcare a lot. It seems like that's something that's pretty important to you to address. And this is another one of those things where I go, okay, yes, we need childcare, but why? Is that really the government's responsibility? Why isn't it the people? And, you talked about affordable childcare. So would you start this part of the conversation off a little bit with talking about why you think it's so important, and maybe kind of some suggestions that you have for making it easier for working parents.
Well, if you're going to expand the economy, you need to get young working people move in the state with families. And unless you're going to be attracting people that are earning six-figure incomes, you're going to have a problem attracting these
Mm,
people because there is no affordable childcare. I do believe, and this is where you and I may not agree, but I do believe there's a role for government here because I think it's so
oh,
important that
mm,
unless we get childcare, again, going back to the premise that we absolutely must expand our economy, we got to do
mm,
whatever it takes to expand that economy. And the two things that I think that are critical to the expansion is housing, workforce housing, and childcare. Because until you lower that cost of
mm,
childcare, then there's no incentive for people to have families or want to move in
mm,
here with families. But my point is that we're squandering money in many other places. I shouldn't say we are squandering some, but there are some things that, well, that's a nice program. Boy, if we had all kinds of money, yeah, let's do that. But we don't. And we got to set priorities. And the two highest priorities, in my mind, are an order. Well, the highest priority is to expand this economy. We need more taxpayers in this state. And in order to do that, we need to expand workforce housing and we need to expand um, childcare. I mean, there's some other things we can do, broadband and what have you, but those are two critical ones. And there's a role for the government involved in this. Only not at this juncture, there's a role for government, particularly with childcare. Um, because we're not going to get the expansion unless we have that child care. the problem with childcare is that for young people, they just don't have, they're starting out, their incomes are on the low side, and so they can't afford the childcare.
Now,
And they don't earn enough. One earner, they can't live on a one earner family. So there's a role for government to come in and help subsidize that, and you out of taxes, and a lot of that would be paid on later on when that working family, they move up the economic ladder and their children are no longer there, so they have higher incomes, and so they'll pay a higher tax rate. They'll move into a higher tax bracket, and then, if you will be actually paying that back. So I think
yeah.
there is a role for government, but we got to set priorities, and nobody wants. There's never any conversation about priorities. Never.
So,
The conversation on priorities, it only takes place really in the appropriations committee, maybe
mm,
somewhat in the institutions. Um, because what the appropriation committee, they get all the demands from all the policy committees. So if you're on healthcare, you're really not terribly concerned. Your issue is policy. What's the policy we should do? And many of those policies have significant costs with them. So then that goes over to appropriations. Appropriations says, look, we know how much money we got. We cannot fund all of these things, so they have to make decisions, and that's why appropriations is the most powerful committee up there, because they are the ones that are actually putting the priorities. But what is missing from this is that there is not a discussion of that, of hopefully of the entire body is involved, should be involved in that, and the whole state should be involved. When people run for office, they should state what their priorities are, and they need to say, look, I want to do this, and in order to fund that, we need to cut this. And
so do you
I think
think?
every politician ought to answer that question. The answer, no, we can't raise taxes. That may ultimately be the desired decision, is to raise taxes. But for the sake of discussion, let's see where you are. What would you cut?
Well,
What
and
would you
that's,
cut?
I think that is a really good way of looking at it, is having people take responsibility for what they believe are priorities. So I remember I was having a conversation, and people accused me of like not caring about the environment, and I said no. I just don't think the state of Vermont needs to be subsidizing solar panels for rich people. That is a wealth transfer from the lower and middle classes to the rich, because the only people who can really afford to install and upkeep solar panels are rich people. So I would
I
much
agree.
rather.
I'm one of them. I'm one of them. I got solar panels out there. It's a great investment.
But why am I paying for somebody who's, I would much rather have my tax dollars go to a working family that needs help with childcare than your solar panels. Like, I don't
Absolutely.
understand why saying that the other things are a priority is a problem for people. That's, I keep going back to that, but my understanding, and I don't know if you can speak to this, but my understanding is childcare. One of the reasons childcare is such an issue in Vermont is because there's tons of regulations against like homeschooling, smaller in-home childcare facilities and things like that. Vermont has regulated it to the point where it has to be like a corporate daycare, basically.
Yeah, they passed rules and regulations here. I don't know, was it 4 years ago or I don't know, time flies. That basically gutted the small, or the person that took in 3 kids in the neighborhood, or some grandmother. I'm going to care for my 2 grandchildren, and I'm going to take in 2 more from other neighbors, and
Right.
they, the rules and regs have gutted that, and so there are less opportunities. Everything, it's pure economics, supply and demand. If the demand, let's say is fixed for childcare, but the supply as measured at openings, all of a sudden it gets smaller. You really don't need to go get a PhD in economics to know that the prices are going to go up. And that's just, that's just what's happened. Now, I don't, I understand that there were some issues involved in that, and it's a complicated issue. But the point is that we need to address it, and that's much more important in my mind than and spending millions of dollars on global warming in this state, when all of that money won't mount to a hill of beans in addressing the problem. I'm not saying we're ignore. I'm not a climate denier, and I'm say it's important, but we need to set priorities. And if your goal is not to have a modern day feudal system in the state where you've got elite, well-to-do class, and then you got everybody else. If that's your image, then fine. Let's keep on trucking. That's where you're gonna, don't change, because we're headed that way. We're always a long way toward it. But if you want to have a society with mobility, for people can enter the workforce and move their way up, and you have a diverse population, then we need to change our policies around, and we need to say what are the priorities. Right now, the priorities ought to be childcare and housing, and less on green energy. Because green energy, not only, it's a double whammy. It's taking money that could be spent on these other issues, but it's also going to raise the cost of living in the state. Particularly for the low income people. I was absolutely, I guess I'm a heretic. I knew that I always was opposed to the whole subsidy program that they had for solar panels. But I got to tell you, I guess I'm a greedy capitalist. I couldn't let it go by.
Hey,
I had to take advantage of it.
If you're going to take my taxes and I'm going to pay for it, then I'm going to take it.
Mama didn't raise any. Somebody was stupid, and so I had to do it. But it's wrong. The electric lines, they happen to run through my property, but I basically get the use of those lines for free. In the summertime, particularly in the spring, the summertime, and the fall, I'm generating extra electricity, and so it goes back out on that line. And then in the wintertime, I don't generate as much. And right today, I'm not generating anything because the snow's all over them. And so I'm using the lines to get the electricity into my house. But I generate so much in the summertime, and I get that extra credit that really, my utility bills are a couple $100 max for the year. And I really have not paying anything for those lines out there, that capital infrastructure. Now they've recognized that, and they're making some changes to the program. They made it less advantageous to the property owner, but there's a real push to oh no, we can't do that. We're going to generate all these jobs through energy. Well, you're not going to. If you're going to generate these jobs, and the assumption is that some other industries are dying, or that they're going to pay so well that they're going to attract them from other industries, because there's a labor shortage in this state.
Right.
There's a severe labor shortage. So to come up with an industry that's supposedly going to create all these new jobs, where the hell are they going to live?
Because they can't afford it, because we've made it impossible to build housing. And if they have a family, they can't afford to put them in childcare.
Yeah, well, if they pay them $60 an hour to put up solar panels, well, then fine. Then they probably can afford to buy a house or build one, and maybe even and if both parents getting $60 an hour, then they can afford childcare. So, God, enough to make a guy want to start drinking first thing in the morning. I'll tell you.
It's so true. It is one of those things that I think, and we'll wrap it up here, and I'll give you the last word, Bob, but it just makes me, you show us, the legislature, not you, Bob, but the legislature shows us where their actual priorities are. You know, they say that they're for the little people and they say that they care about the poor and the needy and whatever, but their actions tell a very different story. And I'm at a loss for how to highlight that to my listeners, to my neighbors, and to other Vermonters to just have them see, you know, hey, you say that these are what your priorities are. You show us a very different thing by the legislation that you propose and the things that you push. I don't understand how people do not see the hypocrisy and the maybe hypocrisy is not the right word, and I don't want to say that they lie, because I don't think that they're even aware that they're not actually for the little guy. I think that they think what they're doing is for the little guy without realizing that what they're doing is actually for the rich. And I'm at a loss for how to make that clear to people. But I will say, oh, go ahead if you're going to respond to that.
No, I understand, many of these people that want these programs. I understand that they're yes, everything else being equal, if we actually had a money tree or we had our own printing press, yeah, we could have. That would be a good program to have. But I mean, but again, going back to analytically challenged and short-sighted.
Yeah.
So in order to have this, oh yeah, this is really great and people will benefit from this. What's the cost? What's the cost now? What's the cost 10 years from now?
Mm.
And people, they don't do that.
Yeah.
We don't have that discussion so that we can so people can make informed decisions based on the true cost and benefits of it. And then we can set priorities.
Yeah.
But, again, it's analytically challenged and short-sighted. People need to look beyond just what's going to be the next year or two.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I understand they want to help out the less fortunate people, and that's great. And so don't I. And I contribute. I contribute to COTS and other things like that. I want to help them out too. But ultimately, the long-term solution is to get the economy going.
Yep.
To the extent that you siphon off money that retards the economic growth to take out some of these programs, ultimately you're compounding the problem.
Yep. Oh, that is so well said. So before we log off for the day, Bob, is there anything else you want to say in closing? Do you want to let people know how they can get in touch with you if they need to hire an economist for something? How do you?
I don't want anybody getting in touch with me.
I'm retired. Leave me alone.
Yeah, I told you I am retired. My favorite expression is, well, I still do some consulting on a very limited basis, and I do that particularly because of the wintertime. I need something to do. I need something to do. I don't in the summertime. I don't need anything to do. But I lost my train of thought here. But so I don't. I'm 73 and finally free. That's my expression that I use, and it truly is. And I think I may have mentioned it earlier on that I'm really very upset and very concerned and very disheartened over what's happening at the national level and even at the state level. But from a personal perspective, I don't think I've ever been happier. And now that I'm not in the legislature, it's a godsend. I don't know how. I honestly don't think I could have done it. I really don't. When your heart's not into something and you're tilting at windmills, what's the point?
Yeah.
And my advice to people, if you're a working class person, a young person working, they're thinking about staying in Vermont, don't move out. Seriously, that's my best advice.
If I
had a child, I wouldn't want him to move away. I'd say, but the best thing you can do is move away, because you're not going to. It's going to be a real struggle to get ahead in you. You're not going to unless Dad's going to be willing to come in and fund a lot of money up front to buy you a house and get you established. you're going to have difficulty in getting going. So until this state gets its priorities, and my advice to younger people is get out.
Well, and that's what, my husband has said before, maybe everything just has to crash and burn like it did in places like Detroit for people to get it, for people to understand what they're doing. He said, I don't think people will get it or care enough to pay attention, because that's what we're dealing with a lot of times is, I told people when I was running for Senate, I wasn't running against my opponents. I was running against ignorance and apathy. So it's either the people who don't think that their voice matters and just don't care anymore because they're tired of it, or they're willfully ignorant and they don't pay attention to what's going on. They just listen to the sound bites and they go along with it instead of actually doing the research and learning for themselves. And until it gets to the point where the average person is harmed by the behavior of our legislature, I don't think people are going to get it.
Yeah, I don't either. I've said all along for years that the only way this state's going to get religion is for it to hit rock bottom. I thought that might occur in 2009, but the federal government bailed us out. I thought maybe it might occur here, and it looked like 10 months ago that would happen with COVID-19. That finally we'd say, well, look, we got to live within our means. We've got to really start putting some priorities. And here we are. We got $250 million of which we can spend elsewhere. I mean, that's great, but nevertheless,
they doubled down.
It's like spoiling a kid. The kid says, "I want this." Here you are, and then they want more, and they want more and more. You can't ever say no, and you and you secretly say, "Yeah, I wish they'd change." Yeah,
but you just keep enabling it. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
We
All
just
right.
keep enabling. That's right.
All right. Well, let's hope that it doesn't come to that, but it might. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you for joining me for a conversation with Mr. Bob Bancroft, economist, who does not want you to contact him because he's retired. But I just want to take a moment, too, to say thank you for your service in the legislature. It is not easy to be in the minority party in the legislature and the way that they treat people and the way that they talk. And so I just personally want to say thank you for being there and for sticking up for those of us who can do math, can do analytical thought, and enjoy your retirement.
Thank you very much.
All right.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. Hold on with me 1 second, Bob.